medium rare, and try not to embarrass yourself this time. The words didn't echo. They landed, sharp and clean, like something practiced, something habitual, something that had never been questioned. The low amber lighting of the private dining room softened everything except the tension. Crystal glasses caught the glow. Silverware rested untouched. A $500 million deal hovered over the table like a silent storm, dressed in tailored suits and polite smiles. Ethan Caldwell didn't look up when he spoke. He never did. Not to people like her. Naomi Brooks stood still for half a second, just long enough to register the tone, not the request, the tone. Then she nodded once, subtle, controlled, and turned toward the kitchen. Her steps were quiet, precise, the kind you develop when you learn early that being noticed can cost you more than being invisible. Around the table, the conversation resumed as if nothing had happened. Words like equity, timeline, and closing structure floated in the air, heavy with money and ego. Ethan leaned back in his chair, one hand resting near his glass, the other scrolling briefly across his phone before setting it down again, his attention always divided, always calculating. He was a man used to control, to outcomes bending in his direction. The restaurant was just another room he owned for the night. But Naomi had been watching long before he spoke. She noticed the way his jaw tightened when one of the partners mentioned a delay. The slight pause before he answered certain questions. The glance, quick, almost invisible, toward the man seated 2 chairs to his left. Details most people missed. Details she didn't. Inside the kitchen, the noise shifted, orders called, pans moving, heat rising. But Naomi moved through it like it wasn't there. She reached for the plate, the steak perfectly seared, juices resting just right, exactly how he asked. Then she paused, just for a moment. Her eyes flicked to the service counter where a stack of order slips lay scattered, blank space between scribbled requests. Her hand hovered, not hesitant, decisive. She picked up a pen. 1 line. That's all it took. No hesitation in the ink. No second thought. She folded the small piece cleanly, precise edges, nothing messy, nothing dramatic. Just quiet intention. Back in the dining room, the conversation had grown louder, more confident. Someone laughed too hard. Someone else leaned forward, sensing victory before it was earned. Ethan spoke again, this time with more certainty, his voice steady, measured, the kind that closed deals before signatures ever touched paper. Naomi approached the table without a sound. Plate balanced. Expression neutral. She set the steak down in front of him with practiced grace. But as she did, her fingers brushed the edge of the table just enough to leave something behind. Small. Unnoticed. Invisible to everyone but the one person it was meant for. Ethan didn't react at first. Why would he? To him, it was just another plate, another moment beneath his attention. He continued speaking, outlining terms, pressing advantage, his confidence building with every word. The others listened, some nodding, some calculating their own positions. The room felt settled, decided, until it wasn't. His hand moved casually, reaching for the knife. That's when he saw it. The folded piece of paper, resting just beside the plate. Out of place. Subtle. He frowned, just slightly, irritation more than curiosity. For a moment, he ignored it. Then something, instinct, maybe, made him stop. His fingers picked it up, unfolded it. And just like that, everything changed. His expression didn't explode. It didn't shatter. It froze. Completely. The kind of stillness that doesn't belong in a room like this. His eyes scanned the line once. Then again. Slower this time. The color drained, not dramatically, but enough. Enough for the man across from him to pause mid-sentence. Enough for the rhythm of the room to break without anyone understanding why. Ethan Caldwell, the man who controlled outcomes, who shaped rooms, who never hesitated, stopped. Completely. And for the first time that night, he looked up. Not at the deal. Not at the partners. At her. The room did not collapse into chaos. It did something far more unsettling. It went quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like every sound had been gently removed one piece at a time. Ethan Caldwell kept his eyes on the note for a fraction longer than anyone expected, long enough for the man beside him to shift in his seat, long enough for the confidence in the room to begin cracking at the edges. Then he folded it. Not carelessly. Not in anger. Precisely. The same way it had been given to him. His fingers lingered on the paper as if it carried weight far beyond its size. Across the table, Daniel Mercer, the lead partner, cleared his throat lightly, trying to pull the conversation back on track. Ethan, as I was saying, the revised terms, but Ethan did not respond. He did not nod. He did not even pretend to listen. Instead, he reached for his glass, lifted it halfway, then stopped, set it back down untouched. That was the first signal. Subtle, but wrong. Naomi was already walking away when she felt it. Not a sound, not a call, a shift, the kind you do not hear but recognize. She did not turn immediately. She did not rush. She simply slowed, just enough to confirm what she already knew. Something had landed. Behind her, a chair moved slightly. Not loud, just enough. Ethan stood. The movement was controlled, but it cut through the room like a line drawn across a page. Conversations at nearby tables softened, curious without being obvious. The partners at his table exchanged quick glances, their confidence slipping into uncertainty. This was not part of the script. Ethan finally spoke, but not to them. "Excuse me." 2 words. Even. Flat. But final. He stepped away from the table, leaving behind the untouched steak, the deal mid-sentence, the momentum he had built all night. Naomi reached the edge of the dining room just as she heard his footsteps closing the distance behind her. Not rushed. Not aggressive. Intentional. She stopped near the hallway that led toward the service area, turning slowly as if she had expected him all along. For the first time that night, Ethan Caldwell looked directly at her. Not through her. Not past her. At her. His expression was controlled, but the edges of it told a different story. There was calculation, yes, but beneath it, something else. Something closer to recognition. "Where did you get this?" he asked, holding up the note between 2 fingers. His voice was low, steady, but stripped of the arrogance it carried minutes ago. Naomi did not answer immediately. She met his gaze without hesitation, her posture calm, her hands resting lightly at her sides. "Does it matter?" she said softly. The question was not defiant. It was precise. Ethan studied her, searching for something. A tell. A crack. Anything that would return the balance he was used to. But there was none. The hallway light cast a softer tone here, away from the polished glow of the dining room. And in that quieter space, the difference between them felt less like status and more like distance. "You wrote that someone at my table is about to cost me everything," he said, his grip tightening slightly on the paper. "That is not something you guess." Naomi's eyes did not move. "No," she replied. "It is not." A beat passed. Then another. The air between them held steady, neither side rushing to fill it. Behind Ethan, the dining room continued in low murmurs, the deal waiting, the partners watching, the night hanging in suspension. "So I will ask you again," he said, more quietly now, less command, more need. "Where did you get it?" Naomi tilted her head just slightly, not in challenge, but in clarity. "From listening," she said. "Something you stopped doing the moment you walked in." The words landed differently than his had earlier. Not sharp, not loud, but undeniable. Ethan did not respond right away. For a man who built his life on answers, on control, on certainty, silence was unfamiliar territory. And yet, here it was, standing in front of him, wearing a uniform he had not even noticed an hour ago. Naomi did not move. She did not step back. She did not fill the silence with anything unnecessary. She simply let the weight of what she had said settle where it needed to. Ethan Caldwell had spent years in rooms where silence meant power, where the one who spoke last controlled the outcome. But this felt different. This silence did not belong to him. It pressed in from all sides, unfamiliar, uncooperative. He glanced briefly over his shoulder toward the dining room, where Daniel Mercer and the others were. Pretending not to watch, their conversations reduced to careful murmurs, their eyes drifting back every few seconds. The deal was still there, waiting, but it no longer felt secure. It felt exposed. Ethan turned back to Naomi, his expression sharpening, trying to rebuild control from instinct alone. "Listening to what?" he asked, his voice quieter now, measured in a way that suggested he was choosing each word instead of owning them. Naomi's gaze remained steady. "To the parts people assume no one hears," she said. "The side comments. The timing. The things that do not match." Ethan frowned slightly, not in confusion, but in recognition that he was missing something. He had heard the conversation. He had let it. Every number, every condition, Every projection had been laid out with precision. There were no surprises. There were not supposed to be surprises. Be specific, he said, a hint of impatience slipping through, not as arrogance, but as urgency. Naomi took a small breath, not nervous, not hesitant, simply grounding herself before speaking. When Mr. Mercer mentioned the supply chain delay, she said, her tone even, you did not react. But the man to his left did. Not with concern, with relief. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly as the details settled in. Naomi continued, her voice calm, almost observational. He checked his watch immediately after. Twice. Then he stopped contributing to the conversation. Completely. People do that when they are waiting for something to happen, not when they are building towards something. Ethan's grip tightened around the folded note, the memory of the moment replaying in his mind with uncomfortable clarity. He had seen the movement. He had dismissed it. That is not proof, he said, but the certainty in his voice was thinner now, less solid. Naomi nodded once. No, it is not. A brief pause followed, not empty, but deliberate. But then there was the number, she added. Ethan's attention sharpened instantly. What number, he asked. Naomi met his gaze without hesitation. The revised valuation, she said. It was off by just enough to sound reasonable, but not enough to raise questions. Except it did not match what was said earlier. Not exactly. And no one corrected it. Ethan felt something shift again, deeper this time. That number had bothered him for a second. A fraction of a second. He had pushed it aside, assuming it was a rounding difference, a harmless adjustment. He had chosen momentum over doubt. Naomi's voice remained steady. People correct mistakes in deals like this, she said. Unless the mistake is intentional. The hallway seemed quieter now, the distant clink of glassware and low conversation fading into something indistinct. Ethan looked down at the note in his hand, unfolding it again, reading the single line that had stopped him cold. The man on your left already sold you out. Check the number again. His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in calculation, the kind that builds when a pattern begins to form too clearly to ignore. For the first time that night, the deal no longer looked like a victory. It looked like a setup. He exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that does not release tension but organizes it. Then he looked back at Naomi, really looked this time, not as part of the room, not as background, but as the person who had just shifted everything without raising her voice. You are telling me, he said carefully, that I am about to sign something I do not fully understand. Naomi did not smile. She did not soften the truth. I am telling you, she replied, that you stopped asking the right questions the moment you assumed you already had the answers. The words did not challenge him. They reframed him. And for a man like Ethan Caldwell, that was far more dangerous. Ethan Caldwell did not respond right away. He had built an empire on instinct sharpened by data, on decisions made faster than most people could process a question, and yet now he stood still, holding a piece of paper that weighed more than any contract on that table. The hallway felt narrower, quieter, as if the world outside that moment had been placed on pause. Behind him, the deal waited. In front of him, the doubt grew. He folded the note again, slower this time, more deliberate, then slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket as if it belonged there. Not discarded. Not forgotten. Kept. That was the second signal. Naomi noticed it without reacting. She had seen people dismiss things like this before, brush them aside, protect their certainty at all costs. He did not. That meant something. Ethan straightened slightly, the familiar posture of control returning, but not fully. There was a shift now, subtle but real. If you are wrong, he said, his voice steady but quieter than before. You just interfered with a deal worth $500 million. Naomi did not flinch. And if I am right, she replied, you were about to sign away more than money. The words did not rise. They did not push. They simply existed, grounded, impossible to ignore. Ethan studied her again, longer this time, searching not for weakness, but for consistency. People lied in many ways. Through their voice, their posture, their timing. She did none of it. She stood exactly as she had before. Calm, certain, present. That made the decision harder. And clearer. He glanced once more toward the table. Daniel Mercer had leaned back now, trying to appear relaxed, but his fingers tapped lightly against the glass in front of him, an unconscious rhythm that did not match the confidence he had shown earlier. The man to his left, the one Naomi had mentioned, sat quieter than before, his shoulders slightly tense, his attention drifting toward the hallway more often than the conversation. Ethan saw it now. Not because it had changed. Because he had. He exhaled slowly, then made his choice. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Precise. He turned back toward Naomi. "Stay here," he said, not as a command, but as a request that still carried weight. She did not nod. She did not answer. She simply held his gaze for a brief second, then stepped aside, giving him space to pass. That was enough. Ethan walked back into the dining room. Each step measured, his expression reset into something sharper, more controlled, but no longer blind. The moment he reached the table, the conversation tried to resume, Daniel leaning forward with a practiced smile. "Everything all right?" he asked, tone casual, eyes searching. Ethan did not sit immediately. Instead, he rested his hand lightly on the back of his chair, letting the silence stretch just long enough to shift the balance. "Let us revisit the revised valuation," he said. Simple, direct, but different. Daniel's smile held for a fraction too long. "Of course," he replied, reaching for the documents. "As I mentioned earlier, no." Ethan cut in, not loud, but firm. "Let us go through it again, line by line." The room adjusted instantly. The easy confidence tightened. Papers moved. Glasses were set down. The rhythm changed. Ethan took his seat slowly, his attention focused now, not on closing, but on understanding. As the numbers were read aloud, he watched. Not just the page. The people. Daniel spoke smoothly, but his cadence shifted when certain figures came up, a slight hesitation that would have gone unnoticed before. The man to his left avoided eye contact entirely, his posture closing in, his earlier ease replaced with something more guarded. Ethan listened, fully, for the first time that night. And with every number repeated, every detail examined, the structure of the deal began to look less like an opportunity and more like a trap built carefully enough to pass as trust. Across the room, near the hallway, Naomi stood exactly where he had left her. Not watching the table directly, not drawing attention, just present. But she did not need to see his face to know. The shift had already happened. The room no longer belonged to the man who walked in earlier. It belonged to the one who finally chose to listen. The numbers sounded the same the second time. That was what made it dangerous. Clean. Polished. Just different enough to pass, not different enough to alarm. Ethan Caldwell sat still, one hand resting lightly against the edge of the table, his fingers no longer tapping, no longer impatient. He was listening now, not for agreement, but for friction. And it was there. Small. Subtle. But real. Daniel Mercer continued speaking with the same smooth confidence, walking through projections, margins, timelines, but the rhythm had shifted. There was a hesitation before certain figures, a slight recalculation in tone when he reached the revised valuation. Not enough to stop a deal. Enough to reveal intention. Ethan did not interrupt this time. He let it play out. Every word. Every pause. Every glance. Then he looked to the man on Daniel's left. "Walk me through your assumptions on the adjustment," he said, voice calm, almost conversational. The man blinked once, caught off guard not by the question, but by being seen. "It is a standard buffer," he replied, shifting slightly in his seat, adjusting his cuff as if the answer required movement. "Market volatility, supply fluctuations, things like that." Ethan nodded slowly, as if accepting it. But he did not move on. "Define standard," he said. Not louder. Not sharper. Just precise. The table grew quieter. Daniel leaned forward slightly, ready to step in, but Ethan raised a finger just enough to hold the space. Not aggressive. Final. The man hesitated again, longer this time. "It is within acceptable range," he said, less certain now. Ethan leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed, but his eyes locked. "Acceptable to who?" he asked. The question did not attack. It exposed. A flicker crossed the man's face, quick, almost invisible, but Ethan saw it. The same flicker Naomi had described. Not concern, not confusion. Relief, slipping into something else. Pressure. Daniel cleared his throat, attempting to regain control. "Ethan, I assure you, everything has been thoroughly reviewed. We would not bring you anything that was not. Then you will not mind walking through it again," Ethan said, cutting in without raising his voice. The confidence in the room tightened further. This was no longer a closing conversation. This was an audit. Papers shifted. A tablet was turned. Numbers were pulled back up. And this time, Ethan did not just listen. He calculated. In real time. His mind moved through the figures with the same precision that built his company, stripping away presentation, stripping away narrative, leaving only structure. And there it was. Not obvious. Not careless. But intentional. A reallocation. A minor shift in projected cost that, when compounded across the full scope of the deal, redirected value. Not immediately. Gradually. Quietly. Enough to benefit one side over time without triggering immediate resistance. Ethan's gaze lifted slowly from the page to the man on Daniel's left. This time, the man did not meet it. That was the third signal. Ethan closed the document gently, placing it flat on the table. The sound was soft, but it carried. "We are not signing tonight," he said. No emphasis. No explanation. Just a decision. The reaction was immediate, though controlled. Daniel leaned forward, concern breaking through his composure. "Ethan, there is no need to delay. We have aligned on all major points. This is just a minor." "It is not minor," Ethan replied, still calm, still steady. "It is deliberate." The words settled heavier than any raised voice could. The man to Daniel's left shifted again, his earlier composure gone, replaced with a stillness that felt forced. Daniel's expression tightened, calculations running behind his eyes now, not ahead. The balance had changed. Completely. Ethan stood slowly, smoothing his jacket as if concluding something routine, something expected. But nothing about this was routine. He looked at each of them, one by one, not with anger, not with accusation, but with clarity. "When I sign a deal," he said, "I expect to understand every line. Not just the ones presented to me." No one answered. There was nothing left to say that would restore what had just been lost. The momentum, the trust, the control. It had all shifted. And not because of a negotiation tactic. Not because of a legal clause. Because of a single line, written quietly, delivered without recognition, by someone they had all chosen not to see. Across the room, Naomi remained near the hallway, her posture unchanged, her presence still understated, but the impact undeniable. She did not need to hear the words at the table to know how it ended. She had seen enough. Ethan turned from the table without another word, his decision final, his pace measured, but different now. Not rushed, not distracted, focused. And as he walked back toward her, the distance between them no longer felt like status. It felt like understanding. The distance between them closed without urgency, but with purpose. Ethan Caldwell stopped a few feet away from Naomi, not too close, not distant, just enough to acknowledge that the space between them had changed. The noise of the restaurant continued around them, plates being carried, quiet conversations resuming, but none of it reached the moment they stood in. He did not speak immediately. That alone was different. Minutes ago, silence had been something he controlled. Now it was something he respected. Naomi met his gaze the same way she had before, steady, unshaken, not waiting for approval, not expecting gratitude. Just present. Ethan exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing, not disappearing, but reorganizing into something clearer. "You just saved me from signing something I would have spent months trying to undo," he said, his voice lower now, stripped of the edge it carried earlier. Naomi did not smile. "I just pointed out what you were already close to seeing," she replied. The correction was subtle, but intentional. She did not take credit for the outcome. She reframed it. Ethan studied her for a moment, absorbing that distinction. Most people would have leaned into the moment, claimed the impact, used it. She stepped back from it. That told him more than the note ever could. Most people would have stayed quiet, he said, not as a compliment, but as an observation. Naomi nodded slightly. "Most people are not asked to speak," she said. The words settled between them, simple, but layered. Ethan glanced briefly toward the table he had left behind. Daniel Mercer was speaking again, but now his voice carried less certainty, his gestures tighter, his control diminished. The man to his left sat still, too still, the kind of stillness that comes from knowing something has shifted beyond recovery. Ethan turned back to Naomi. "You heard all of that from the floor?" he asked. Naomi shook her head gently. "Not all of it," she said. "Just enough." A pause followed, but this one was lighter, less tense, as if the weight of the moment had already passed its peak. Ethan reached into his jacket, pulling out the folded note again, looking at it briefly before holding it between them. "You wrote one sentence," he said, "and it changed the direction of a deal that has been in motion for 6 months." Naomi's eyes moved to the paper, then back to him. "It was the right sentence," she said. Ethan almost smiled. "Not fully, just enough to register." "That is not something you learn serving tables," he said. Naomi tilted her head slightly, considering the statement. "No," she replied. "But it is something you learn when people assume you are not paying attention." The air shifted again, softer this time, less about tension, more about recognition. Ethan looked at her differently now, not evaluating, not measuring, but understanding that he had missed something important long before tonight. "What is your name?" he asked. The question came naturally, but it carried weight. Naomi did not answer immediately, not out of hesitation, but because she understood what the question meant now. It was not about identification. It was about acknowledgement. "Naomi," she said. "Naomi Brooks." Ethan nodded once, repeating it quietly as if committing it to memory. "Naomi," he said, the name settling into place. Another pause, but this one did not feel empty. It felt complete. Behind them, the restaurant continued, the night moving forward, other tables, other conversations, other stories unfolding without interruption. But for a moment, none of that mattered. Ethan glanced once more toward the table, then back to Naomi, his expression shifting again, this time not with urgency or calculation, but with decision. "I am not finished with that room," he said. "But I am also not walking back into it the same way." Naomi held his gaze, understanding without needing explanation. "Then do not," she said simply. "No advice. No instruction. Just a statement." Ethan nodded, once, firm, grounded, then turned back toward the dining room, his steps measured, but different now, carrying something he did not have when he walked in. And Naomi remained where she was, not stepping forward, not stepping back, because she did not need to move to change the direction of anything. She already had. Ethan Caldwell did not rush as he returned to the table. He did not reclaim the room with force or volume. He reclaimed it with presence, the kind that did not need to announce itself because it had already been felt. Conversations at the table quieted before he even reached his seat, not out of respect, but out of uncertainty. Something had changed, and no one could quite define it yet. That made it dangerous. Ethan did not sit immediately. He stood behind his chair for a moment, his hand resting lightly against the polished wood, his gaze moving across each face at the table, not quickly, not casually, but with intention. Daniel Mercer tried to recover first, leaning forward with a measured smile that did not reach his eyes. "Ethan, we can clarify anything that needs clarification," he said, his tone controlled, but thinner than before. Ethan did not respond right away. He let the silence stretch, not to intimidate, but to reset the pace. Then he pulled his chair out and sat, slow, deliberate, grounded. "We are going to do more than clarify," he said. His voice was calm, but it carried differently now. Not as command, as control. Papers were still spread across the table, numbers frozen in place, projections waiting to be trusted again. Ethan reached forward, turning one document slightly so it faced him directly, aligning it with care. That small movement shifted the focus of the entire table. "We are going to rebuild this," he continued, his eyes scanning the page, then lifting again. "From the beginning." The reaction was immediate, though contained. Daniel's smile tightened further. The man to his left remained still, too still, his hands now clasped together in a way that suggested restraint, not confidence. "That is not necessary," Daniel said, attempting to regain momentum. "We have already agreed on the framework." Ethan looked at him, not sharply, not aggressively, but with a clarity that made the words land heavier than they sounded. "You agreed on a framework," he said. "I listened to a presentation." The distinction was subtle. The impact was not. A quiet shift moved through the table, like a current changing direction beneath still water. Ethan leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed, but his attention precise. "Start with the valuation," he said. "Original, not revised." Daniel hesitated, just long enough for it to be seen. Then he nodded, signaling to an assistant to pull up the earlier figures. The tablet lit up, numbers reappearing, cleaner this time, less adjusted, less refined. Ethan watched closely, not just the screen, but the reactions. The man on the left shifted again, his eyes flicking toward Daniel for a fraction of a second, then away. That was enough. Explain the difference, Ethan said, his gaze steady. Daniel cleared his throat, adjusting his tone. As we discussed, the revision accounts for no, Ethan said, cutting in gently, but firmly. Not what it accounts for. Why it changed. The question did not allow for rehearsed answers. It required truth or something close enough to reveal itself. The room tightened again, not with noise, but with awareness. Daniel's confidence faltered, just slightly, but enough. Market conditions evolved, he said, choosing his words carefully. Ethan nodded once, as if accepting the statement. Then he turned his attention to the man beside him. And you agreed with that assessment? He asked. The man hesitated. Longer this time. His earlier composure gone, replaced with calculation that came too late. It seemed reasonable, he said. Ethan held his gaze for a moment, not pressing, not pushing, just letting the answer exist. Then he looked back at the document, tapping the number lightly with his finger. Reasonable is not the same as accurate, he said. The words did not rise. They settled. And in that moment, the structure of the deal, the confidence that had carried it, the assumption that it would close without resistance, began to unravel without a single raised voice. Across the room, Naomi stood where she had been, her presence unchanged, but her impact still moving through the space like something invisible and undeniable. She did not need to step closer to see it. The room had already turned. The room no longer felt like a place where a deal was being closed. It felt like a place where something was being uncovered. Slowly, carefully, and without permission. Ethan Caldwell did not raise his voice. He did not accuse. He simply continued asking the kind of questions that could not be answered twice the same way. That was enough. The numbers remained on the screen, clean and structured, but now they looked different. Not because they had changed, but because the confidence around them had. Daniel Mercer shifted slightly in his seat, adjusting his posture as if control could be regained through composure alone. Ethan, we are losing time, he said, his tone measured, but carrying a subtle urgency now. We both know delays like this can impact the market. Ethan nodded once, acknowledging the point, but not accepting it. Then accuracy matters even more, he replied. The words were simple. The implication was not. A quiet pause followed, the kind that forces people to choose between continuing a performance or stepping into something real. Daniel chose to continue. The adjustment is within industry standards, he said, repeating the phrase as if repetition could restore its strength. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his attention narrowing. Standards are built on patterns, he said. Patterns can be studied. He tapped the document lightly, not aggressively, just enough to anchor the moment. This does not follow one. That was the shift. Not dramatic, not explosive, but final. The man to Daniel's left exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if something inside him had given way. His eyes dropped to the table, no longer attempting to maintain the confidence he had earlier. Ethan saw it. He did not react outwardly. He did not need to. Let us isolate the change, Ethan continued, his voice steady, controlled. Remove the narrative. Remove the assumptions. Show me the raw calculation. An assistant hesitated for a fraction of a second, glancing toward Daniel before moving forward. That hesitation spoke louder than any explanation. The screen shifted. Numbers broke down into smaller components. Line items separated. Margins revealed themselves in a way they had not before. And there it was. Clearer now. Not hidden. Just layered. A redistribution that favored one side incrementally, disguised within acceptable variance, but intentional in direction. Ethan did not react immediately. He let the silence sit. Let the table absorb what was now visible. Then he leaned back, his posture relaxed again, but his eyes sharp. Who approved this revision? He asked. The question was not directed. It did not need to be. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but the man beside him spoke first. It was a collaborative adjustment, he said, his voice controlled, but lacking the certainty it once had. Ethan turned his gaze toward him fully now, not confrontational, but focused. Collaborative implies alignment, he said. This implies advantage. The distinction landed without resistance. There was no easy way to redirect it. Daniel's composure cracked, not visibly, but in the way his words slowed, His response is no longer immediate. Ethan, I think we are overanalyzing a minor shift, he said. Ethan held his gaze for a moment, then shook his head slightly. No, he said. I think I was underanalyzing it before. The correction was quiet, but it closed the door on any attempt to move forward without addressing what had been revealed. Around the table, the energy had changed completely. What had once felt like momentum now felt like exposure. What had once been controlled now felt uncertain. And none of it came from raised voices or aggressive tactics. It came from clarity, from attention, from a willingness to question what had been presented as final. Across the room, Naomi remained where she had been, her presence still understated, her role unspoken, but her impact now undeniable. She did not need to see the numbers on the screen. She did not need to hear the exact words being exchanged. The shift had already told her everything. Ethan Caldwell was no longer negotiating to close. He was now deciding what deserved to continue. And for the first time that night, the answer was no longer obvious. No one spoke immediately after the word settled. Advantage. It lingered in the air, heavier than any number on the screen, heavier than the deal itself. Ethan Caldwell did not move to fill the silence. He let it expand, let it press against the edges of the table until it forced a reaction. Daniel Mercer was the first to break, but this time there was no smooth entry, no practiced transition. Ethan, I think we are drifting away from the purpose of this meeting, he said, his tone still controlled, but now carrying something else beneath it. Pressure. Ethan did not look away. The purpose of this meeting, he replied evenly, was to establish trust before signing. He paused just long enough for the words to land fully. We are still on that purpose. The distinction closed the space for argument. Daniel leaned back slightly, recalibrating, searching for a way to regain ground that was already slipping. The man to his left remained quiet, his earlier confidence gone, replaced with a stillness that no longer felt controlled. It felt contained. Ethan shifted his attention back to the document, tapping once more on the section where the adjustment had been hidden. Walk me through the intent behind this structure, he said. Not the explanation. The intent. The question did not allow for numbers. It demanded motive. That was where the room fractured. Daniel hesitated, just briefly, but enough. The man beside him inhaled, as if preparing to speak, then stopped. That hesitation answered more than any explanation could. Ethan saw it. He did not press immediately. He waited. And in that waiting, the pressure built without effort. Finally, the man spoke. It was meant to create flexibility, he said, choosing each word carefully, as if precision could protect him. Ethan nodded once, acknowledging the attempt. Flexibility for who, he asked. The question landed clean. No edge, no accusation, just clarity. The man did not respond right away. His eyes moved briefly toward Daniel, then back to the table. That was the fourth signal. Alignment had broken. Daniel stepped in quickly, trying to restore control. For both parties, he said, his tone firmer now, pushing confidence back into the room. That is how these structures work. Ethan held his gaze, not challenging, not conceding. Then show me where the flexibility benefits both sides equally, he said. No one moved. The assistant at the end of the table hovered over the tablet, waiting for direction that did not come. The numbers remained frozen, exposed now in a way they had not been before. What once looked balanced now looked directional, intentional. Ethan leaned back slowly, his posture relaxed, but his attention unwavering. You built a structure that looks fair at first glance, he said, but shifts value over time in a way that is difficult to detect unless someone stops and asks why. He let that settle, not as an accusation, but as a conclusion. Daniel's expression tightened, his usual composure now carrying visible strain. That is a mischaracterization, he said, but the words lacked the certainty they once held. Ethan did not respond to the denial. He did not need to. The evidence had already spoken. Instead, he reached forward, closing the document again, his hand resting on it for a moment before pulling it back. I do not sign deals built on assumptions, he said, and I do not continue conversations built on misalignment. The words were final, not because of how they sounded, but because of how they were delivered. Calm, certain, unmoved. The room absorbed it in silence. Daniel looked as if he wanted to argue, to push back, to reclaim control, but there was nothing left to anchor that argument. The structure had been exposed. The intent had been questioned, and the trust had been broken. Across the room, Naomi remained still, her presence unchanged, her role still unspoken, but her impact now fully realized. She did not need to hear the final words to understand the outcome. The deal was no longer a negotiation. It was a decision already made. And as Ethan Caldwell rose from his chair once more, this time without hesitation, without pause, the room did not try to stop him. Because everyone at that table understood something they had not at the start of the night. The power in the room had shifted. Completely. And it had not come from the man they had been trying to impress. It had come from the one they never thought to notice. No one followed him when he stood. That was the first confirmation. Not hesitation. Not resistance. Just stillness. The kind that happens when a decision has already removed the need for reaction. Ethan Caldwell adjusted his jacket with a small, controlled movement, not out of habit, but out of closure. The table behind him no longer held weight. Not the numbers. Not the conversation. Not the people. Daniel Mercer shifted forward slightly, as if considering one last attempt, but the moment had already passed. Ethan, he said, the name carrying more caution than confidence now. We can revisit this tomorrow. With clearer alignment. Ethan paused, not turning immediately, allowing the words to reach him fully before deciding if they deserved a response. Then he turned, just enough to meet Daniel's gaze one last time. Clarity is not something you schedule, he said. It is something you either have or you do not. The words were not harsh. They did not need to be. They were final in a way that left no room for interpretation. Daniel leaned back slowly, the fight leaving his posture, replaced by a stillness that looked more like acceptance than defeat. The man to his left did not move at all. His eyes remained fixed on the table, as if the numbers might rearrange themselves into something salvageable. They did not. Ethan turned away again, this time without pause, his steps carrying him across the dining room with the same measured pace, but a completely different presence. Conversations at nearby tables softened as he passed, not because they knew what had happened, but because they could feel it. Something had shifted. Something quiet, but undeniable. Near the hallway, Naomi Brooks stood exactly where she had been, her posture unchanged, her expression steady, as if she had never stepped into the center of anything at all. And yet, everything had moved because of her. Ethan stopped in front of her again, closer this time, not by accident, but by choice. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was no longer heavy. It was clear. It is done, he said finally, his voice calm, grounded, no trace of the earlier edge. Naomi nodded once, not in surprise, not in satisfaction, just in acknowledgement. I figured, she replied. Ethan reached into his jacket again, pulling out the folded note, looking at it briefly before holding it between them. One sentence, he said quietly, and the entire room changed direction. Naomi's eyes moved to the paper, then back to him. Rooms do that, she said. When the truth walks in. Ethan let out a small breath, something close to a quiet laugh, but not quite. Not amusement. Recognition. You do not work like someone who belongs on the floor, he said, the observation direct, but no longer dismissive. Naomi held his gaze without shifting. I work where I am, she said. That does not define what I see. The answer settled deeper than he expected. Ethan studied her again, not evaluating, not measuring, but understanding that the difference between them tonight had not been position. It had been attention. He glanced briefly back toward the table, then returned his focus to her. You saw something no one else in that room did, he said. Naomi shook her head slightly. No, she replied. I saw something everyone else ignored. The distinction landed clean. Ethan nodded once, slower this time, as if confirming something to himself rather than to her. The restaurant continued around them, plates moving, conversations rising and falling, the night carrying on as if nothing had happened. But for Ethan Caldwell, everything had shifted. Not because he lost a deal, because he almost lost something far more valuable. His awareness. And the only reason he had not was standing in front of him, wearing a uniform the room had been trained not to see. He looked at Naomi one last time, not as a customer, not as a CEO, but as someone who had just been taught something he should have learned long ago. Thank you, he said. The words were simple, but this time they were real. Naomi did not respond to the thank you right away. Not because she did not hear it, and not because it did not matter, but but because she understood something most people missed. Words only carried weight when they were followed by change. She held Ethan Caldwell's gaze for a brief second, then gave a small nod, acknowledging the moment without expanding it. The restaurant moved around them, the quiet rhythm of service continuing as if nothing had shifted, but the air between them held something different now. Not tension, not distance, awareness. Ethan lowered his hand slowly, the note still between his fingers, then folded it once more and placed it back into his jacket, this time with intention, as if it belonged to a part of the night. He would not forget. He glanced toward the table again, not with regret, not with hesitation, but with clarity. The deal was gone, but the lesson remained. "How long have you been working here?" he asked, his voice steady, no longer carrying the edge of authority, but something closer to curiosity. Naomi shifted her weight slightly, her posture still composed. "Long enough," she said. It was not evasive. It was sufficient. Ethan gave a slight nod, accepting the answer without pressing further. He had spent years asking direct questions and expecting direct answers. But this was different. This was not about extracting information. It was about understanding presence. "You see patterns," he said, more to himself than to her. Naomi's expression did not change, but there was a quiet acknowledgement in her eyes. "Everyone does," she replied. "Most people just stop looking." The statement settled with more weight than the conversation at the table ever had. Ethan exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that came after a realization, not a victory. He looked around the dining room again, this time differently. Not scanning, observing. The way people moved, the way they spoke, the way attention shifted depending on who held perceived importance. It had always been there. He had simply filtered it out. And tonight, that filter had been removed. A manager passed nearby, offering a polite glance toward Ethan, ready to assist if needed, but Ethan did not acknowledge him. His focus remained on Naomi. "You changed the outcome of something very few people in this room would even question," he said. Naomi shook her head slightly. "No," she replied. "I just asked the question first." The distinction was precise. Ethan nodded again, slower this time, letting the truth of it settle. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was no longer something to manage. It was something to respect. Then Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out a business card, clean, simple, nothing excessive. He held it between his fingers for a second, then extended it toward her. Not forcefully, not as an offer that demanded acceptance, just an option. Naomi looked at the card, then at him. She did not take it immediately. That, more than anything, made Ethan pause. Most people would have reached for it without thinking. Opportunity often disguised itself as urgency. But Naomi did not move. "Why?" she asked. One word. Clear. Direct. Ethan did not answer immediately. He considered it, not as a reflex, but as a decision. "Because I do not ignore people who pay attention," he said. The answer was simple, but it carried weight because it was true. Naomi studied him for a moment longer, then reached out and took the card, not quickly, not hesitantly, just deliberately. She glanced at it briefly before slipping it into the pocket of her apron. Not a reaction, not a promise, just a possibility. Ethan watched the movement, understanding that nothing about this exchange guaranteed anything. And that was exactly why it mattered. "If you ever decide you want to do something different," he added, his tone even, "call me." Naomi met his gaze again, her expression steady. "I already am doing something different," she said. The words were quiet, but they landed with clarity. Ethan almost smiled again, this time a little more visible, not out of amusement, but respect. He nodded once, accepting the answer without needing to change it. The restaurant continued around them, the night moving forward, but something had shifted beneath it all. Not loud, not visible, but real. And as Ethan Caldwell turned to leave, his step steady, his posture unchanged, he carried something he did not walk in with. Not a deal, not a win, but awareness. And that was something no one at that table could have offered him. The door did not close loudly when Ethan Caldwell left. It moved with the same quiet precision as everything else in the room, but the absence it created was noticeable. Not because of who he was, but because of what had just happened. The table he left behind remained still for a moment longer, the weight of the conversation lingering even as the staff began to clear glasses and reset the space. Daniel Mercer sat back, his hands folded loosely in front of him, his expression no longer confident, no longer controlled, just thoughtful in a way that suggested recalculation had replaced certainty. Across the room, Naomi Brooks returned to motion as if nothing had happened. She picked up a tray, adjusted a glass, responded to a quiet request from another table. Her pace did not change. Her posture did not shift. To anyone watching without context, she was simply doing her job. But the room felt different around her. Not louder, not more attentive, just altered in a way that did not need acknowledgement to exist. A younger server passed by her, glancing briefly toward the private table before leaning in slightly. "What happened over there?" he asked under his breath, curiosity outweighing caution. Naomi did not look toward the table. "Nothing you need to worry about," she replied, her tone calm, not dismissive, just final. The server nodded, accepting the boundary without pushing further, then moved on. Naomi continued her work, steady, precise, present. In the kitchen, the energy remained consistent, orders moving, voices calling out times and adjustments. But even there, a subtle awareness had begun to circulate. Not gossip, not speculation, just the quiet recognition that something had shifted in the front of the house, something that did not happen often in places like this. Naomi placed a finished plate on the counter, checked the order, then stepped back, her attention moving briefly toward the hallway where the conversation had taken place earlier. Not to revisit it, just to acknowledge it. Then she moved on. Outside, the night carried a different kind of silence. The city moved as it always did, headlights passing, distant conversations blending into the background. But Ethan Caldwell stood for a moment beside his car without opening the door. The note was still in his pocket. He could feel it there, not physically, but in the way it had interrupted something he had taken for granted. He reached into his jacket, pulling it out again, unfolding it once more under the soft glow of a streetlight. The words had not changed. They did not need to. He read them again, slower this time, not as a warning, but as a reminder. Then he folded it carefully and placed it back, this time deeper into his pocket, as if securing it somewhere more permanent. He looked back toward the restaurant, not with intention to return, but with a different kind of awareness. The kind that stays. Inside, Naomi moved between tables, her presence unchanged, her role unchanged, but the meaning behind it no longer invisible. She did not check her pocket. She did not look at the card. She did not need to. The moment had already passed into something else. Not an opportunity, not a turning point, just a continuation of something she had already been doing. Paying attention. A guest at one of the nearby tables called for the check, their voice light, unaware of the shift that had taken place only minutes earlier. Naomi stepped forward, offering a polite nod, her tone steady, her movements exact. The world had not stopped. It rarely does. But sometimes, in the middle of routine, something small changes direction. Quietly, completely. And only the people who are paying attention ever notice. The night did not end with applause. It did not end with recognition or announcements or anything that would make the moment feel larger than it was. It ended the way most real moments do. Quietly. The last few tables finished their meals, conversations softened into closing remarks, chairs shifted back into place. The staff moved with the same steady rhythm, clearing, resetting, preparing for the next day as if nothing extraordinary had taken place. Naomi Brooks carried a final tray toward the kitchen, her steps measured, her posture unchanged. The card Ethan Caldwell had given her remained in her pocket, untouched, not out of indifference, but because it was not urgent. Nothing about her world depended on it. Inside the kitchen, the lights felt brighter, harsher, the hum of activity beginning to slow as the night wound down. A dishwasher clinked in the background. Someone laughed quietly near the prep station, and orders no longer came in waves, but in scattered intervals. Naomi set the tray down, checked the last ticket, then stepped aside, letting the space breathe again. One of the senior servers glanced at her briefly, studying her face as if searching for a sign of something different. There was none, just the same calm, the same focus. "Long night," he said casually. Naomi nodded once. "They usually are," she replied. The exchange ended there, simple, complete. She untied her apron slowly, folding it with care, placing it in her locker along with the rest of her things. Her movements were deliberate, not rushed, not delayed, just consistent. When she reached into her pocket, her Her fingers brushed the edge of the business card. She paused for a second, then pulled it out, holding it under the fluorescent light. Clean design. Minimal words. A direct line to a world that operated far from this one. She looked at it, not with excitement, not with doubt, just with clarity. Then she turned it over once, as if checking for something more, and slipped it back into her pocket. Not discarded, not claimed, just held. Outside, the air had cooled, the kind of late evening stillness that settles after a long day. Naomi stepped out onto the sidewalk, the city quieter now, the noise reduced to distant traffic and the occasional passing voice. She stood there for a moment, not waiting, not thinking ahead, just present in the space she occupied. Across town, Ethan Caldwell sat alone in his office, the city lights stretching beyond the glass walls, his desk untouched since he arrived. The note lay in front of him now, unfolded, placed flat against the surface as if it belonged there more than any contract ever had. He had read it more than once, not because he needed to understand it, but because he needed to remember it. The simplicity, the timing, the fact that it came from someone the room had dismissed without a second thought. He leaned back slightly, his eyes moving away from the paper, reflecting not on the deal he walked away from, but on the moment he almost did not see. That was the part that stayed, not the loss, the near miss. Back outside, Naomi began to walk, her steps steady, her direction unforced. The night did not offer her answers. It did not need to. She had not been looking for a different path. She had simply stayed aware of the one she was already on. The card remained in her pocket. The moment remained in the room she had already left. And the world continued forward, unchanged on. The surface, but quietly altered beneath it. Because sometimes, power does not shift with noise or force or recognition. Sometimes, it shifts in a single sentence, written without hesitation, delivered without permission, and understood only by the ones willing to see it. She did not announce it. She did not claim it. She did not need to. She saw.